Okay, let's get into this. Talking to yourself. It's something, well, most of us probably do, right? Maybe in our heads, maybe out loud sometimes when we think no one's around.
Definitely. And the perception is often, a bit negative, like, is it weird? Is
Yeah.
something wrong?
Exactly. People get a bit awkward about it, but the sources you sent over, they really flip that idea on its head.
They absolutely do. What this material shows and what we're going to unpack in this deep dive is that this self-talk is actually pretty fundamental,
Yeah.
beneficial.
Yeah, beneficial is the key word. The material points to studies showing real positive impacts on your thinking, your emotions, even your physical performance, apparently.
It's much more than just like idle chatter. It seems to be a tool we're all equipped with. So our mission here is to dig into the insights from your sources, look at the science behind it, and really understand why this conversation with yourself isn't just normal, but can be, well, pretty powerful.
Right. So think of us as walking through this material with you. We'll pull out the main ideas, the key findings, so you get a clear picture of what the science says about talking to yourself. Let's dive in.
Okay, so first off, how do these sources even define self-talk? It's pretty straightforward, actually. It's just that conversation you have with yourself. It can be internal, like thoughts, or sometimes spoken out loud.
And straight away, the material tackles that negative stereotype we mentioned.
Yeah, it challenges it directly. And it brings in some interesting background, digging into why we might do this in the first place. There's mention of the psychologist Lev Vygotsky.
Ah, yes, Vygotsky. His ideas provide a really solid foundation for understanding this, don't they? It goes back to childhood development.
It does. The material explains Vygotsky's view that when kids are learning language, thought and actually speaking out loud are kind of separate things initially. Kids use external speech to help figure things out, to guide themselves, even before the thought is fully formed inside.
Right, I remember my nephew doing that, muttering instructions to himself while playing.
Exactly. And Vygotsky's idea, as the source lays it out, is that as we grow, this external speech gradually turns inward. Our thoughts start to sound like sentences in our head.
But that need to sort of talk things through, that verbal processing, it doesn't just vanish, does it?
Not at all. Vygotsky called the internal version internal speech, and the kids' version, sometimes still partly external, private speech. The big takeaway here is that this isn't just a childhood thing we grow out of. It sticks with us. It's part of how we think, how we regulate ourselves.
So the material basically frames it as being baked into our cognitive development. It's part of how our brains are wired to learn and process information.
Precisely. So it's normal, it's developmental. But then the sources go further into the benefits. How does this self-talk actually help us day to day?
Okay, yeah, the practical stuff. Where does it make the biggest difference according to this material?
Well, one major area highlighted is cognitive function, specifically focus in getting things done more efficiently.
There was that experiment they mentioned, right, where people were talking while doing tasks.
Yes, that was really telling. They had some participants just say meaningless stuff, like repeating a word over and over.
And that just messed things up, made them perform worse.
Right, it was just noise, interference. But here's the interesting part. Other participants were encouraged to use their talking for self-direction. So actually talking themselves through the steps of the task.
Like, okay, first I pick up this, then I do that.
Exactly like that. And in those cases, performance and efficiency actually went up. It really shows it's not just the act of making noise, but the content and purpose of the self-talk that matters. Purposeful self-talk helps.
That makes a lot of sense.
Huh?
And this links directly to learning and memory, too, which the material covers quite a bit.
It really does. It suggests self-talk is a potent learning tool. Think about it. When you're learning something new, don't you sometimes repeat the instructions out loud? Or sound out a tricky word?
Guilty as charged, especially with names or phone numbers.
Well, the material backs up that instinct. It mentions findings that, for instance, writing something aloud significantly boosts your brain's ability to remember it compared to just reading silently.
Helps it stick somehow. Oh, and there was that cool bit about visual memory, too. That one really clicked for me.
Ah, the Where's Waldo effect, kind of.
Huh.
Like looking for a specific item in a really cluttered image. The example used was finding a chicken in a busy drawing.
Yeah, and the material said if you actually say the name of the thing you're looking for out loud, like saying chicken, chicken, chicken while you scan.
You find it faster. It's because verbalizing the target helps your brain focus its attention. It gives your visual system a clearer instruction. Okay, team, we're filtering for chicken right now.
So it sharpens your visual search pattern. That's fascinating. It's like your internal voice is directly tuning your perception.
Exactly. It connects that inner dialogue to how we interact with the world outside.
Okay, so it boosts focus, memory, even visual search.
What about the more psychological side? Emotions, motivation? Does the material touch on that? Oh, absolutely. Big time. The sources position self-talk as a really important psychological tool. Take emotional regulation, for instance.
How does talking to yourself help with feelings?
Well, the material suggests that just talking through difficult emotions, sadness, anger, guilt, whatever, can be really helpful. It's like you're articulating them, giving them shape.
Kind of like journaling out loud or venting to yourself?
Sort of, yeah. By verbalizing the feeling, even internally, you're externalizing it a bit. It helps you maybe explain it to yourself, understand it better, and eventually process and accept it. The material calls it a form of self-therapy.
Putting words to the internal chaos to make it less chaotic, I can see that. What about building yourself up, confidence, dealing with anxiety?
Another major benefit highlighted, especially for positive self-talk. But there's one specific technique the material really zooms in on, backed by research, that seems particularly effective.
Let me guess. Is this the slightly weird sounding one where you talk to yourself in the third person?
That's the one. Instead of saying, I can handle this, the advice is to say, you can handle this, your name, or just, you got this.
It feels a bit unnatural at first thought, doesn't it? Why does that work better?
The sources explain it through something called psychological distancing. It sounds technical, but the idea is simple.
Okay, tell me more about psychological distancing. Does it mean you're, like, detaching from yourself?
In a way, yes, but a helpful way. Especially when you're stressed or facing something high stakes like a job interview, giving a speech, maybe a tough competition. By using you instead of I, you create a little bit of mental space.
How does that help?
It shifts your perspective slightly. It's like you're giving advice or encouragement to a separate person, maybe a friend, rather than being completely tangled up in your own first-person anxiety and stress.
Ah, okay, so it lets you access a calmer, more objective part of your mind, maybe? Less emotional flooding.
That's the idea. Precisely. It dials down the immediate emotional intensity, helps you regulate, gain perspective, and deliver that pep talk more effectively. It's surprisingly good at calming nerves and boosting confidence right when you need it.
And it's not just about feeling better, right? The material showed it actually improves doing things, too. The sports examples.
Exactly. It mentioned studies, for example, with tennis players. Those who regularly used positive self-talk strategies, including that third-person technique, didn't just report feeling less stressed during matches.
They actually played better.
They did. Their performance outcomes were measurably higher compared to players who didn't use it as much. It shows a really tangible link between this internal conversation and real-world results across different kinds of activities.
Okay, wow. So self-talk seems like this Swiss Army knife for the mind, helps focus, memory, emotions, confidence, performance. But there has to be a catch, right? The material did mention times when it's maybe not so good.
That's a really crucial distinction the sources make, yes. While most self-talk is totally fine and beneficial, there are situations where it could indicate a problem. It's about knowing the difference between typical internal chatter and something more concerning.
Right, like it mentioned that for people dealing with anxiety or depression, that inner voice can become, well, overwhelming or
Yeah.
constantly negative.
Yes, the nature of the self-talk can become a problem. If it's just a relentless loop of worry, self-criticism, or negative predictions, that's obviously not helpful and can be part of those conditions. The sheer volume and negativity become debilitating.
But that's different from, say, a more serious disorder. The material drew a pretty clear line there, didn't it? What was the key factor?
The absolute key distinction, according to these sources, is whether the self-talk involves or is linked to auditory hallucinations.
Okay, explain that difference. Normal self-talk versus hallucination.
So, normal self-talk, even if it's negative or excessive sometimes, is still recognized as your own internal voice, your own thoughts. Auditory hallucination, in the clinical sense described, is when someone perceives a voice or voices that seem distinct, separate from their own thinking, almost like hearing someone else speaking when no one is there.
Like an external voice, but it's inside your head or seems to be coming from outside, and it doesn't feel like your thought.
Exactly. It feels alien, like it originates elsewhere. The material specifically mentions conditions like schizophrenia, where individuals might hear these distinct voices and sometimes even talk back to them out loud. That's the critical difference highlighted.
Gotcha. So while negative self-talk loops are bad, hearing a separate, distinct voice you interact with is the major red flag for a potential underlying disorder.
That's the main diagnostic indicator discussed in this context, yes. Hearing voices that aren't recognized as your own thoughts is a different category and signals the need for professional evaluation.
And the sources were clear. If someone is experiencing that kind of thing, or even if their regular self-talk is just overwhelmingly negative and causing distress, seeking professional help is really important.
Absolutely. Understanding the benefits of normal self-talk is great. It validates a common experience.
Yeah.
But recognizing these warning signs and encouraging people to get help when needed is just as vital, and the material stresses that point.
Okay. So, wrapping up this deep dive based on your sources, the big picture seems to be talking to yourself isn't weird at all. It's actually a normal, deeply ingrained human behavior with some really significant upsides.
Definitely. It's like a built-in psychological toolkit we all have. We saw how it can sharpen focus, boost memory, and learning.
Help us manage tricky emotions, build confidence, especially with that neat third-person trick.
And even demonstrably improve performance in things like sports. The evidence laid out in the material is pretty persuasive.
It really shifts your perspective on it, doesn't it? It takes this private, maybe slightly embarrassing habit and shows you the science behind why it works. It validates what a lot of us do naturally anyway.
And it also gives you some ideas for how to use it more consciously, more intentionally, like trying that positive self-talk or the you statements before your next stressful meeting or presentation.
Right. So, as you, our listener, reflect on all this stuff we've explored from the material, here's a final thought to chew on. Given just how much this internal conversation seems to affect your focus, your mood, your confidence, how well you do things, how aware are you, really, of what you're saying to yourself day in and day out?
Yeah. Could simply tuning into that inner voice more often, maybe tweaking the script a little, using some of these techniques, be a straightforward way to unlock better focus or more calm or just understand yourself a bit better?
Something to observe this week, perhaps. Pay attention to that voice in your head. It might be guiding you or maybe even holding you back in ways you hadn't quite realized.